Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests. Some of you may have recalled our treasurer, Ryan O'Leary, coming before us and speaking about kicking the can and then attacking Keynesian economics and taking a stab at Social Security. That was the framework of the presentation that he gave. Now, I want to preface my remarks just like he did that evening by telling you that I, like him, I am not an economist. Before I went to law school, I was a history major, a history buff. I've studied American history, Western civilizations, English history, Russian history, the history of the Far East, and also the Greek history and the Peloponnesian Wars. So I have some feeling for history, and when I heard him speak about Keynesian economics and the other things that he talked about, I said, you know, it just doesn't make sense. This is not how we got to be where we are today. I said to myself, and you can comment just like he asked you. If you think I'm saying something wrong, as he did, go like this. If you think I'm saying something that is mistaken, a mistaken reading of history, go like this. I say to you, just as Ryan O'Leary did. But to start, there are both good debts, good deficit spending, and deficit spending that doesn't do any good. For example, every person who wants to buy a home and live in a home deficit spends to own a home. If that weren't the case, there'd be no home ownership in this country. Hundreds and thousands of young people in this country deficit spend by taking out student loans so that they become doctors and lawyers and school teachers, and they acquire the higher education that they need. So to say deficit spending is what's destroying this country is an absolute fallacy of thought. And I want to talk a little bit about history and what history has told me about where we are and how we got there. Now, our history as a constitutional government began in the year 1790 when George Washington became first president. Things happened then, but the first thing I want to talk about occurred in 1803. That was Thomas Jefferson's administration in office. He was presented with an idea, even though we had no money, that we ought to invest in the future of our country. He said, the French have come to me and they have said, you can purchase the Louisiana territories. All it will cost is $28 million. And he said, others also said, wait a minute, this isn't in the Constitution. The government can't buy land because government buy land isn't in the Constitution. He said, wait a minute, implied powers give us the right to buy the land. So what he did was to beg, borrow, and steal to purchase 828,000 square miles of land. We invested in the future by making this enormous purchase of land that stretched from above the Canadian border today all the way to Texas. And as a matter of fact, it is one of the reasons that that flag has 50 stars in it and not 13 stripes. We developed a future for this country. The future for this country was also developed in the way that we developed an idea called, let's have colleges and universities built on the basis of land grants. Land grant colleges were created by giving land to states all over the country so they could, in fact, develop their state university systems. Florida, the University of Florida, is a land grant college. Now, this is not about politics, Republican versus Democrat, though it's true that Thomas Jefferson was the first Democratic president, or the founder of the Democratic Party. But in 1862, the Land Grant College became an act because another president decided to do that. That man was Abraham Lincoln. He's the founder of the Republican Party. He went on to talk about and pass into law the Homestead Act, which gave settlers the opportunity to invest in the future by taking land that they would own if they settled it for 5 years. He also passed, because he was in the middle of the Civil War, he passed a method for funding the Civil War. He is a Republican. He passed the first federal income tax. Oh my gosh, can you imagine that? A Republican did that. And not only that, but in 1863 he said, we need to bring the West Coast to the East Coast and develop the Transcontinental Railroad. That's how we can invest. Even though we're in debt up to our ears, we need to invest in the future. This, you see, is Keynesian economics. In 1867, another Republican president, Andrew Johnson, said, you know, the Russians want to sell me Alaska. Some people called it Seward's folly. They said, no, this is terrible, a ridiculous idea. He bought it anyway for $7.2 million. I think it's incredibly ironic that this Republican president purchased Alaska. Had that not happened, the last name of the vice president who ran on the Republican ticket in the last election would possibly have been Sarah Palinski, or maybe Comrade Palinski. But that didn't happen because of an investment in the future. I can go on and on. I can talk about the Panama Canal and Teddy Roosevelt, who spent $378 million building the Panama Canal by investing in the future. I can talk about a Secretary of the Interior. This happened in 1928. The Secretary of the Commerce, rather, was a civil engineer. What did he decide to do? He said, we need to do something about power and hydroelectric. We need to go out to develop a dam on the Boulder River. What an incredible idea. It became the largest single block of concrete ever poured in the history of mankind. It became the Hoover Dam. It was the Hoover Dam because the Republican president, Herbert Hoover, is the one who envisioned the idea and talked Congress into Keynesian investment in the future of America. We can go on from there to the interstate highway system. We can go on from there to the race to the moon. We can go on from there to President Nixon and developing a theory for clean air and clean water. All of this, you see, was an investment in the future of this country. And we can certainly talk about the fact that in 2009 we decided to invest in the auto industry. And do you know what happened in 2010? Chrysler in 2010 had a profit of $360 million after receiving loans from the government to prop them up. That's nothing compared to what General Motors did, because their profit was $4.6 billion. Why? Because we invested in the future. That's why I said to Ryan O'Leary that this idea that we can't spend money for the future of America is absolutely and totally mistaken, and a totally mistaken concept of how we got to where we are today. Toastmaster.